Okay. Hello and welcome to this very special reading and talk. I apologize for the delay. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are so looking forward to hearing from Lauren Camp, who will give a talk and a reading from her incredible book, 100 Hungers. This is just a gorgeous, elegant book, and I'm so looking forward to the conversation. So Lauren Camp serves as New Mexico Poet Laureate. She's the author of 8 poetry collections, most recently In Old Sky, published by the Grand Canyon Conservancy in 2024, which grew out of her experience as astronomer in residence at Grand Canyon National Park. She has received fellowships from the Academy of American Poets and Black Earth Institute, as well as the Dorset Prize, a Glenna Luce Award from Prairie Schooner, and finalist citations for the Arab American Book Award, Big Other Book Award, and Adrienne Rich Award. Her poems have been translated into Mandarin, Turkish, Spanish, French, and Arabic. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much. It's a wonder to be here. Thank you to the behind the scenes people who did all the technological stuff that needed to happen so that we could do this. Thank you to the JCC. Thank you to Lit Youngstown. The timing of this talk, it feels significant to me. I just passed what would have been my father's 90th birthday. And so I'm really happy to bring him into the room and tell you a little about him. The talk is called Discovering Baghdad, How Writing My Father's Story Took Me to the Tigris. It turns out I didn't really know who I was. I knew only who I wanted to be, who I'd made myself become. I didn't know a thing about where I came from. My mother's ancestors were from a town in Lithuania that is, well, what I could see of it online was only a cemetery. I had not been to Lithuania until this summer, where I learned that, in fact, that town still very much exists. But for me, that was a dead end for a long time, as was my father's story. My father was from Baghdad. I knew that. But nearly nothing else about that place, even where exactly it was on a map. When I grew up, 2 of my countries were at war, the US and Iraq. How can someone hold that division and still feel like a unified person? I began writing the poems in my 3rd book, 100 Hungers, which was published in 2016 by Tupelo Press. I began writing to understand my father and where he came from. History is made up of relationships, interactions, experiences. It's made of the environment and the politics of a place, the time period, and so on. Where would I get that information? I couldn't easily look back several generations. Few stories remained with even fewer people to tell them. And my father stayed silent. Rebecca Solnit writes in The Faraway Nearby, a place is a story, and stories are geography, and empathy is first of all an act of imagination, a storyteller's art, and then a way of traveling from here to there. I'd like to share a poem that offers an imaginary conversation with my father. It's called Variation, Let's Pretend. Let's pretend you tell me what happened, how you lived in the city 2 streets from the river. Let's suppose you begin speaking and you speak until all the courtyards and terraces of Baghdad tumble from your mouth. Your words take me to Karkh and back to Rasafa, to Abbasid Palace and Kharakhamaya, the center of business. And now I can see the people who were neighbors, the ruined brick of Khan Murjan, and the eggshell designs of Mustansiriya Madrasa. You run your fat fingers through my dark hair as if in the deep muscle of a temporary sleep. I will quiet for centuries to eat and eat details. And as night is falling, you tell me how Farhud sauntered past in its dark coat and boots, and you didn't see it. Let's agree that I know something was wrong, that I've read those articles you keep sending about the coups against Jews, the invasions. Your gaze in the background is hazy. You name a street and a corner. Who took you to school? Tell me the cycle of daybreak, the month of isolation, the year you were 6. You pull out old photos with arches in the city of suggestions under the cardamom trees. Give me the terrible excitement, your warm, salty truth, the glass cup, the testimony Grandpa hid from his children, the useless sky, the doorpost, the wardrobe. Because I need it. You tell it. The habits, the scarring, the shuffle of leaving your home. You won't make me keep waiting. Let's agree that you'll tell me the details. Please, you have to remember every flake of the air and the furrows of danger. 100 Hungers is a spiraling narrative that tries to connect ancestors and ritual and food. But it's much more complicated than that. 100 Hungers is about how or why my father's family moved from Baghdad to suburban New York in 1950. This story is matched to his American daughter's childhood, loosely based on my youth and told as myth. The memoir, or double memoir, in fact, is written through poetry and mixes personal reflection and family details with social, cultural, and political commentary. It explores the conflict of Arabic heritage and Jewish customs and the effort of holding both in contemporary American culture. Perhaps you're beginning to understand the book, but there's another part I haven't mentioned, the part that explores information that was not given. I owned my Jewish Iraqi heritage even as a girl. I never knew the backstory of my father's relocation until some years ago. Then my dad did not want to or could not recall old memories. I wanted his story, and that was the story I could not access. When I realized this, I gave up on writing 100 Hungers for a time. It was frustrating to try to write without a sense of place and without the help of my main informant. So another poem from the book, this one is called Pause, Hawk, Cloud, Enter. The soup cooks for an hour while vultures and buzzards pluck the market. My father wipes his forehead with a white cloth. Once each day began with khubz and samoon flat and hot from the griddle, and sips of sharbat with sandalwood petals. Those beside the river were not aware of other places. No one knew how long the water ran, trying to get where it had never been. My father hears nothing, and nothing becomes the gate he walks through. There is nothing but what has been erased. Listen to the clumsy way he watches the pigeons, and his laugh when they lift a few streets off. It takes a whole life to make a man. But there was a day he raised his overstuffed suitcase, the day he was sent for, the day desert lost its pungency. That day denied him one future and brought him the trampled ground of another. My father dines on his languages, garlic and lemon, on barley and river. There is hunger and hunger lined up on his spoon, candied apricot, yogurt, his 6th birthday, his 7th. Take the pot from the flame. I was born on ashes, cotton and silk left in basements, on old candelabras and alleys, on someone else's recent past, on clotted sky. How do you live in silence? You talk to absence. You eat, tasting the steam. The ingredients vary. You smash the door. You erase and erase until what you've kept is transparent. You watch earth in the window, your body browning. Ultimately, to move forward, I had to accept that the story I was writing would be incomplete. This allowed, or maybe forced me, into a different sort of creativity. To make progress, I had to move back into what I already knew and into what I could find in books, recipes, grainy photos, other people's historical accounts, and music. For my dad's particular story, the story I most wanted to know, I had to listen mainly to the unsaid. A while back, someone asked, "So, are you Jewish or Arabic?" As though I couldn't be both. But in fact, I certainly am. There's confusion and beauty in having two different, divergent identities. You belong. You don't belong. You sort of belong. I felt all of these. The book launch for 100 Hungers was held at a synagogue in Santa Fe. Since then, I've read from the book many places, including at the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, and for the Jewish and Arab Studies students at Georgetown University. A Shia Iraqi scholar gave a presentation on the book at the International Autobiography Conference in Cyprus. I'm grateful that both Jewish and Arabic folks have embraced this story. It tells me there can be an overlap, that I don't have to define myself by just one of these selves. And no one else has to be, or maybe even can be, just one ancestry, one type of person. I find this comforting at a time when we see people constantly divided on racial and religious lines. Well, I don't know how much you know about the history of the region, so let me just go over a little bit of it. Baghdad was once a peaceful community. Various faiths intermingled well with each other. The Jews of Baghdad in 1940 were not Jews who happened to be there. They were Arabs who were also Jewish. They were living in the region because they belonged there. It was home. So throughout the book, I have a number of untitled poems, and I want to read you 3 of these. It starts with, it mentions the elder, that is my grandfather, and it has there are a few Arabic words in here. I think they're mostly going to be clear, but it talks about the Dijla, which is the Tigris River. Every morning, the elder took his sons to pray, then let them swim through the cool of the Dijla, while he and his servant went to market, the Souk Hanun, to buy food for the day. Abraham considered a lamb. He checked its hip and slight pelvis, then chose another. Respect and honor stood with him. He bargained a melody of numbers, the lines of his hands, and thick phlegm and spit of his tongue, a frisson of nose, and finally, Na'am. The shohet's sharp blade crossed the great vein in the animal's throat. Blood clumped in the dirt. Abraham listened to the butcher's prayer for food and forgiveness as his servant gathered the carcass. He moved on to yeast stalls and carts, selecting rough fruits from the vendors, past men in deshdasha, white shrouds that unrolled in a drape through the dust, into the haze of attention through the tragic, pleading endings of his language. He followed the scent of rosewater and cardamom, past palm trees rising in clots of cracked earth to buy food for the families of his gardener and baker, his children's 5 nursemaids, the cooks, and the driver. His wife would make platters of calf's liver, olives, and grapes. His wife would make bamia, okra, and meatballs. His wife would make pacha with bread in the broth from the head of the sheep. His wife had been given to him to do this. He thought of the radiant taste of tabit, how it cooked through the night, then lingered on his fortunate lips. The Jewish people arrived to what was then known as Babylon in 586 BC, and for 2,600 years they dwelled comfortably among the Islamic Arabs. 40 years later, the region became known as Iraq. Shortly after, in 700 AD, Baghdad was founded, and it was one of the most important centers of civilization for about 500 years. It was under Ottoman rule until World War I, when Britain, in 1932, defeated the Ottomans. At that time, Jews were 25% of the population of Baghdad. They were well assimilated into the community, working at all levels of farming, banking, commerce, transportation, manufacturing, insurance, and the government. Britain came in and defined the territorial limits. They smushed ethnic and religious groups together. Setting these boundaries caused great strife. And then the king died. King Faisal was a moderate ruler, sympathetic to the Jewish community, sympathetic, really, to all. As he said in 1921, nobody in our country should be named Muslim, Christian, or Israeli. There is only one name, Iraqi citizen. This first Faisal was succeeded by his son, born the same year as my father. The second King Faisal allowed Nazi propaganda to filter into the minds of the people. I'm going to read you another one of those titled poems about this. On the river, men in round boats row forward with long oars of anger. A shadow of fear moves over the country like phyllo, layering, leavening into the city. When 2 Muslim men ask the time, the boy looks up through brown eyes and lashes. Though the boy sees the iron rod in their hands, he answers the question. His watch reads 11:30. The sun stands overhead, heavy in its ceremonial dress. When they strike him, time becomes not long after. Time becomes a corner, and the boy leans against it. Time becomes the river, and he settles to its ripples. Time becomes a construction, a slight body of falling. Bruised clouds follow him home with a wince. A dark star is out, and he hangs from it, swinging slowly. And so the well-being of the Jewish community deteriorated. And of course, too, this was about that precious resource, oil. On April 1st, 1941, a bunch of revolutionary officers staged a coup. To keep the oil out of Hitler's hands, the British invaded Iraq. On June 1st, 1941, a frenzied mob unleashed a two-day pogrom throughout Baghdad against the Jews. This was called the Farhud, which translates to dispossession. Many Jews were killed, wounded, Jewish businesses pillaged, Jewish homes burned. My father was about to turn 6. He never spoke of this. Harold Bloom, in his introduction to the best American poetry, wrote, "If you urge political responsibilities upon a poet, then you are asking her to prefer to poetry what can destroy her poem." My choice in writing 100 Hungers was not to explore a bleak history of the country, but to tell what I imagined was my father's story. If he had felt peace or pleasure, I wanted that in my writing. I asked myself, how did events in the country affect him? And if they didn't, why should I include them? He was a child and then a teen. When did Baghdad's political situation intersect with his experience? So let me return to the history. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Iraq retained its Nazi-aligned ideology. On the day Israel declared independence, May 14, 1948, the Arab League invaded from all sides. My father, his 5 siblings, and his parents were still in Baghdad. I want to read a pantoum, which is a poetic form in which it's an ancient Urdu form, in which every line of the poem repeats. And when it returns, it opens to something new, some new way of hearing it or seeing it, something new within the poem. The poem has a few words you might not know. It has talit and tefillin, Jewish prayer garments. And then it has the Dijla, which is the Tigris River, Sahra, the desert, and the Souk, the market. The poem is called Pieces of Leaving. Gather everything. See the scar on his leg? A talit, tefillin, brown boiled eggs. May God save them from danger. They learn to leave again, less prayer than body in continuous sun, a sympathy for starting over, the possible, all they can hold. A talit, tefillin, brown boiled eggs. May God save them from danger as they tend and pack the rose and myrrh, mirror and trousers. A sympathy for starting over, the possible, all they can hold. What's been taken away is the truth, not the warning. As they tend and pack the rose and myrrh, mirror and trousers, each wearing only the blessing of his or her reason, what's been taken away is the truth, not the warning. Their hands entangled, they deal in defenses, each wearing only the blessing of his or her reason. The death of Kings Faisal and Faisal ajar from the river, the photos. Their hands entangled, they deal in defenses. They needed the Souk, the Dijla, and Sahra. The death of Kings Faisal and Faisal ajar from the river, the photos. They learn to leave again, less prayer than body in continuous sun. They needed the Souk, the Dijla, and Sahra. Gather everything. See the scar on his leg? In July 1948, the Iraqi Prime Minister amended the Penal Code, called Law 51, making Zionism a punishable crime with the threat of death. Although Zionism was never defined, every Jew was thought to be a Zionist. This society was unsafe for them, but they were still important to the society. About 130,000 Jews lived in Iraq in 1949, half of these in Baghdad. A third of the members in the Chamber of Commerce in Baghdad were Jewish. Jewish firms transacted 45% of the exports, nearly 75% of the imports. The head of the Iraqi National Bank was Jewish. The Currency Office Board was Jewish. The Foreign Currency Committee was almost entirely Jewish. Jews were essential to the economy. Even so, Jews were expunged from commercial and cultural positions. By October of that year, all the Jews in government positions, about 1,500 of them, were dismissed. The Jewish people started fleeing, smuggling out their valuables. In March 1950, to stop the uncontrolled flight of assets, Iraq passed a one-year amendment to Law 51 called the Naturalization Act. This statute revoked the citizenship of any Jew who willingly left the country. Upon exit, their assets were frozen. This meant that many left without a homeland and without money to start over. This was the year my father's family left. Left was the word he used, but in essence, they fled. They traveled to the opposite side of the world, to New York, and began again, displaced, without language and without community. Julia Kristeva, the author of the book Black Sun, Depression and Melancholia, wrote, "Naming suffering, exalting it, dissecting it into its smallest components, that is doubtless a way to curb mourning." My father wouldn't name this suffering, and so I believe he carried it with him for the rest of his life. One more of those untitled poems. Actually, this one's titled, the title goes straight into the poem. It's called If He Missed His Country. If he missed his country, her father never said. He paid attention to the plocks of his body. He turned off the music, the slanting wail of the oud. What he could hear was what he would be, husband and father in the city of experience, in a land without stain, without shadow, without eyes. So let me tell you a little about how I wrote the book. The boy parts, of which I've just read you a number of them, were specifically about my father, the eldest son, and I wrote them to a soundtrack of oud music to get the long lines, the weaving sounds. As the writing went on, I began to understand Baghdad's sights and smells, but discovering why the family left their homeland came more gradually. I've told you the history, but I didn't know any of that when I began. Through words, I drew situations and conversations that allowed me to explore the dislocation that defined my father's life and led to my existence as an Arab American female in an old world family. There's a second part of the book, which I haven't read you any of. They're what I considered the girl parts. I wrote those parts as myth. By this, I mean I selected small episodes and tried to manifest a sort of folklore of my ordinary suburban life. The Greek word mythos means simply story, but it can be a story that explains existence. I wrote my myth to explain the origins and symbols of my world, and that world included my Arabic Jewish rituals and values. In essence, I was imagining two creation myths, mine and my father's. I was finding the overlap. So let me read you two poems that hopefully showcase how different our lives were. This first one is sort of loosely about me, and you might listen for the difference in sound between the poems. It's called Who Other. Most afternoons after school, she runs through a blister of houses, collecting the dirt of her childhood from neighbors' front yards. Tudor land, Red Dog land, fire station siren land of wailing, careful light. Her hair grows long with slip knots of hope and chunks of chewing gum. She jumps contented through ropes of abjection. Sometimes lonely, she sorts people and decides no one matters less than any other. And this one is about my father, the boy. The boy and his brothers were driven to school through beams of the sun, through the roaming hearts of lamb and goat, through the feast of the desert. The city was small, and this comforted him. Men spoke in old words, silted and portly with matter, in silver coins, in the thin paper of dinar. His mother lit candles. The boy listened to Arabs, to Muslims and Jews, to voices cascading through anise and ginger. Light squabbles settled over the river. One day my father mentioned he lived in Bataween. That word, that unusual word, led me to a map, and that map showed me which side of the river his house was on. Suddenly I was in Baghdad. It was real, and I cared about it. It was that small amount of setting that started me on the journey of writing. But there were so many obstacles to the book, to the writing of these poems. First, there was a cocoon of silence around the topic of my father's leaving. My dad repeatedly reminded his 3 children of the date he arrived in this country, October 12, 1950. All of his stories began there. I didn't think to look for a before. There was no door into it, no way to turn the knob, to push to an older room. I went the language I had. Every now and again, I slipped an occasional question to my dad, hoping that he would help me access the sphere of his life that came before I knew him. I wanted to know from him what his homeland was like. I wanted to hear him describe it. But Dad either shunted my questions to other relatives or, more frequently, ignored them. I was careful not to probe into dark areas. In fact, my questions were designed to be light. Who took you to school? Did you wear uniforms in class? I asked for the smallest details I could imagine that might open him up enough to tell me about the culture he'd left 62 years before. I never asked about the pogroms, the choked relations between Muslim Arabs and Jewish Arabs. Other people relent if you push hard enough. People have told me this. After all, what person doesn't like to tell their stories? But I never found the right genealogical question, the one that would magically launch him backward in time, exploring old alleys and riverfronts. My father wouldn't speak about any of that history. His greatest interest was always now. Here's another poem, maybe more contemporary poem called Why Dad Doesn't Pay Attention to Iraq Anymore. You can all stop asking about the Abu Ghraib torture and how he felt when the pictures were published of men in long hoods. He was traveling the white rim of traffic from New York to the city of brotherly love, stopping for donuts, cream-filled. When Hussein's statue fell, he was up in his condo, organizing pencils, most with erasers, his radio tuned to Beethoven's Sixth or some college football. Collateral damage, snipers, missiles, vessels, and hostile attention. He's not watching. His black shadows are inverted, his horizon's a gold minaret, the zip and clatter of dust. A river branched under a bridge, then cut from the muscle of land. He sees the circumference of dates. Unsaid words pile in dunes. All he wanted was some portion of yes and stay, those phrases no one could pack. The tick talks backward. The single truth was to stop reading. Letters became drifts. The longest drifts are those we never look at, in terrible gutters and columns of newsprint. Yes, in war stories, everyone dies in the end. After 2 years of gentle inquiry, I realized that he had probably forgotten much of what he must have suppressed all those years. 62 years. I'm sure long hidden viewpoints and discomforts stop meeting you if you no longer go to the corner to find them. So this led to a connected obstacle, my lack of true understanding of Baghdad, where I had never been, and my father's experience there. What was it like for a firstborn male in 1940? I wanted to hear the noise of the market, smell the riverbank, feel the give of the ground. There was so much I couldn't locate. What were the buildings made of? How did it feel to sleep on the rooftops in that oppressive heat? For this, I had to use research and imagination. Another obstacle, I was bored with my own life story. My way to deal with this was to write my memories as myth. The girl poems were originally written in 2 to 3 line vignettes and later expanded. Language was also an obstacle. I don't speak Arabic. The book includes Arabic words, some of which I know because they are names for incredible foods my grandmother cooked for her extensive family. But some are words I've never known. Even if I could learn the pronunciation of them, I can't pull the sounds from the back of my throat. On the day I was finishing the manuscript, checking commas and semicolons, every last fact and Arabic word, I was riddled with uncertainty. I had trusted others on translations of terms. The answers that came back from various sources were jagged and mismatched. I wanted one person to iterate the thick sounds of Arabic. I wanted, after all my imaginings and research, to hear the language. I called my dad on his cell phone. He was in the IKEA parking lot in Northwest Philadelphia. I was worried he would be angry about my needling, but I sucked in my breath and asked him to count from 0 to 3 in Arabic. The words came forward, blown from the back of his throat. Even though he voiced what I had written down, the words seemed different, the language immediate and alive. I'll read you a poem about this language, which I find so beautiful. The poem begins, I am practicing now, turning sleeves and glands of your language through the back of my throat and kissing black edges. So many syllables saturated with flavor of morning. The sky is clear again today. Nichna awadin, we are human. Long shadows fall against windows. No spots, no secret intentions. Hell on, I say. And now means the name of this country. Now is where you try again. Find days on either side, straight and without betrayal. When you were in the old country, in the inventory of cousins, each cluster of hours simmered from minutes. Now, your real language, tongued by chance, writhes and rises from you. A reliance on the throat, the region wet and thick, such wreckage. To my ear, the rough places are beautiful, nourishing. Say anything. Never stop saying anything. These fugitive words are all surface and passage, all friction, animal fragment and brutal. I half expect what doesn't come. Asa, Chosen, Garen. Which of these is right? You never tell me. but when you speak it, your face lifts. Nichna awadim. Suddenly, I want the bulges and bulk. I want to eat one by one the rectangular sounds. You taught me tamar hindi, tamarind, my short lesson in Arabic, swirling the pen right to left on a napkin in a plastic booth at McDonald's. Anyone looking at our particular posture that day would know the sticky brown pulp of the word didn't interest me. But now I believe I was waiting. Uthran, Uthran, Ani ma'afam, Ana ma'at kalam Arabi. I'm sorry. I don't understand. I don't speak Arabic. There are plenty of days I cannot undress, and days of helicopters and clutter, acid and tenderness. Words don't stick right. They emerge mournful and curled, as if stirred in the wrong pot. I asked my dad another question that day. Is this how you say date trees? He affirmed, pronouncing the words thickly. He answered 3 questions, maybe 4. I felt lucky. His words matched or differed from what I had written. I trusted most what emerged from his mouth. I chewed those words, pulling flavors from them. I repeated them back to him, and he laughed at my inability to cough out such harsh sounds. I swallowed, and they became language, food. The book does not offer a straight chronological narrative. 100 Hungers assembles nuanced, subtle ways to look at the details of a story that is missing parts. It is told in 5 sections. Within each, it sometimes collapses the present and the past. I should at least briefly discuss food, since it's the first thing you might think that a book would be about when you hear the title. I wanted the visceral experience of food, and this, in a way, was the easiest of the senses to access. I knew the food. I had savored it. I had pulled it from plates in the center of my grandparents' table. Also, food, the theme, gave the book some shape, a thread to connect pages and poems. In writing 100 Hungers, I tell my story and my father's story to the best of my knowledge, sometimes even choosing to ignore that knowledge, to try to understand what my nerve endings tell me must have happened. Writing it helped me claim the Arab American background I'd never fully felt. The Arabic influence was always connected to Jewish holidays and faith. By the end of the writing process, I owned every part of it: American, Jew, Arab. I might never fully fit into the last group, but I was not an outsider either. There are 2 kinds of people in a family: those who want to, maybe must, understand where they come from, and those for whom it doesn't much matter. Which are you? You see, we all have heritage, and very few of us know enough about our ancestors. There's information out there. It might not be in the logical places, and it might not be intact. But I hope you'll make the time to grab for it. Who you are now and who you came from before and before and before. That's what makes you, you. Thank you so much.
I'm going to unmute so that we can give you a proper Zoom applause. Youngstown would like to thank the Youngstown JCC for including this book in their book discussion. And before I open to questions from these wonderful people around the table with me, I would like to ask you a question about form. About poetry as form. And it seems like this, one of the hungers of this book is the hunger to tell this story. and you could have told the story in different forms, perhaps a memoir or a series of essays or a novel. Um, and you chose to tell this story in poetry. I wondered if you would talk a little bit about poetry for those who are maybe not familiar with reading poetry. And as a writer, what is are the pleasures of this form for telling this story?
It's a beautiful question. Thank you. I came to poetry from a career as a visual artist, in which I was self-taught, and I am really very much self-taught in poetry as well, though I have read copious, copious numbers of poems and books. At the same time as I was making visual art, I was also volunteering as a jazz DJ on my local radio station. And um, for me, poetry let me fold both of those art forms, music and visual art, and all the um, sort of elements of each into the poem. So sound, color, texture, pattern, rhythm, negative space, all that and much more into the poems. It also let me fold absence and mystery and um, the unexpected. The challenge for me of writing a poem is part of what appeals to me, which isn't to say that a novel or a memoir wouldn't also be challenging. I really believe they would be, but they don't interest me in the same ways that a poem does. A poem has to be economical, and yet I was trying to hold a humongous subject, the subject of my history, my heritage, my father, who in himself is, volumes could have been written on him as a person. Um, for me, form, and in my case, the form of poetry is many, many different forms because some of the poems are prose poems, some of them have particular line breaks, some of them are actual poetic forms, like the pantoum that I read you. It allowed me and my fickle self to move around the story, to come at it from this angle and now another angle, knowing that I didn't have to have all the information. I really couldn't. So how could I still tell some kind of story, some kind of complete poem without being able to tell you everything?
Thank you.
What a good question.
Yes, Sherry.
No, I was complimenting you on your question and you on your answer. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Any of you have a question?
I have a comment. Um, after reading the book of poetry, your book, and then listening to you today and the way you piece together the poems and then the history made it so meaningful for me. It added so much. So that was really wonderful because it helped it all flow for me.
Thank you so much. My father wouldn't say anything about the instigating whatever it was that had the family leave, but he did for like many, many, many times he sent emails to me that had articles in them, something attached. And I didn't read them. I mean, like I didn't read them. And I would always write back to him and say, Dad, I want a message from you. That's what I cared about was the note from him. And so at some point after I started writing the book, I had saved every one of those emails, and they were all about the same thing, this thing he wouldn't talk about, the Farhud, the dispossession that happened in 1941. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, here's a trauma that he's trying to tell me without telling me, and I'm ignoring. And um, that was helpful too, though it just led to more questions in a lot of ways. Like, what did you know of this? What, what did you see of this situation? And I'll never know. I'll never have an answer to that.
This story is so specific. Um, in its texture and color, all the foods, and his experience and your experience. Can you speak to the idea, or do you feel that it is also has universal elements? Is this an American story?
Yeah, I mean, I teach classes and I always tell my students to be specific because I think the more specific you are, the more real it is and the more people can connect their own possibly very divergent story to it, but they also will believe it. But I think within specificity, there is some kind of universality. This is my story. But I took the book at one point on when I was on a book tour to Colorado, and a young woman came up to me. She was probably in her early 20s, and her family, or at least her father, was from Mexico. And she was sobbing to me. She said, I don't know anything about my father's story. We're missing 10 years of his life. And I've had other people say, oh, I have Italian heritage or Irish heritage, and I don't know that story. My family started over. They said, we're starting over now. We don't talk about this. So I hope that it allows people to acknowledge or look at or question, wonder about their own stories because I've put this out here.
I think the idea of finding the universal in that specificity is universal itself. I have that same story, and probably everybody in the room does. My grandfather came from Russia, my great grandmother Belarus, and so they spoke Russian, and they all had accents. And when I was young, even now, language is intriguing to me. And I asked them, teach me some Russian words. The only word I learned from both of them, yet they would not tell me anything of their language. They wanted to not be there anymore.
Right.
And yeah. So I think that, and so consequently, I didn't know anything about why they left. I knew how they arrived, but I don't know anything about how they left.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, you asked questions. I didn't even ask questions until I was an adult. There was like some kind of, I don't know, I felt like there was some kind of wall, I guess. Like in retrospect, as I look back over it, probably as a kid, it was just somehow shut down before I could even be curious. And I'm a very curious person, but I didn't ask those questions until maybe like the book took me a long while to write, but until I started writing the book. And by then, my father would really get kind of annoyed with me when I would ask the questions. And I
Yeah.
just didn't understand. I was like, this is great. You'll tell me your story and I'll just put it through the mill of my mind and make it into beautiful, amazing poems if I can do that. But it didn't go that way at all because he wouldn't tell me anything. So, yeah.
How do you think knowing these stories has changed the way you feel about your own life or your own self?
Well, I don't know these stories. I'm had to imagine them,
Mhm.
first of all. So knowing that I had to imagine them makes me feel somehow more connected and also disconnected, maybe. I mean, I was very disconnected before. As a kid, I was disconnected and didn't know it from that history. I mean, I knew whatever was right around me, whatever was at my grandparents' table, the language which was swirling around, the foods, but I didn't know the country at all. So I feel like now this has given me a chance to care about a place that I still haven't visited. I hope to someday, but I don't really know when or how. Um, I ask questions. I mean, I think that's how it's changed me. I constantly ask questions. My husband could tell you, I ask and ask and ask everything. I would like to have the information on everything.
And it's, I mean, 6 years old, that's so young. I don't remember much
Yeah.
from before 6, right?
Well,
Even,
I
well,
don't remember either, but he came to the United States when he was just 15, and I learned my father died in 2019 of Alzheimer's, and as he was kind of plummeting into memory loss, his older memories seemed to surface, as you know, as they say they do. And at one point, I had gone to clean out his apartment. He was in a memory care facility, and I found some letter that I brought with me to visit him. It was in Arabic. I had no idea what it said. And and I opened it. I knew it was from him and to my grandfather. And I opened it and I said, Dad, can you read this? And he started reading just like fluently, like as though he had been reading in Arabic for yesterday, you know, just reading the whole thing and translating it for me. He read probably 5 or 6 lines in which he was asking his father for money because he needed to buy, I don't know, some clothes or something. And then he said, "This is boring." Um, but there were ways that his older self came back. There were times on the phone he told me about actually traveling from Baghdad to the United States. Like I learned how that happened to the person who said your relatives came. I didn't even know how he got to the US. And I learned that he came a couple of weeks after his siblings and his mother. So he traveled by himself to a country where he did not speak the language on numerous planes, and one that had some kind of mechanical failure, and they derailed the plane into Holland, maybe, or Belgium. I didn't know any of this until he started just saying it in his, you know, long-term memory space. And I mean, it was fascinating. And also fascinating to learn that I had guessed pretty well at the parts I had guessed at. So
it's incredible.
Mhm.
Funny. Should I wrap up? Okay. Well, we would love to thank you so very much for this generous telling of the story and for sharing your book. And we can't wait to have you here in Youngstown on Saturday, October 18th at 7 o'clock p.m. at Butler North on Wick Avenue will be your reading, and we love it that you'll be here for 2.5 days, sharing your work and your good self with us. And thank you again, Lauren, and all good wishes from Youngstown, and we'll see you soon.
thank you so much.